Vice President Kamala Harris went where she has never gone before, and frankly, where no Democratic nominee has gone in quite some time, on Fox. The vice president campaigning for those few persuadable conservative voters in an interview that was contentious right from the jump. Fox's Bret Baier questioned the vice president on everything from immigration to trans rights to how she'd be different than President Biden. She was interrupted several times as she was answering those questions, and there were tense exchanges throughout this entire interview. But it was this moment, maybe, when she was asked about Trump supporters that things got incredibly heated.
Why, if he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States? Why is that happening?
This is an election for president of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone.
So are they misguided, the 50%? Are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you...
I'm telling you, that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
I want you to see for yourself regarding what Harris is saying there about the clip that they played of Trump. Fox chose to air only Trump's defense of his threats to use the military against United States citizens. But this is what Trump actually originally had to say.
I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
My lead source tonight is Pete Buttigieg, here, I should note, in his personal capacity as a surrogate for the Harris campaign. Thank you so much for being here. I mean, you introduced yourself at the Democratic National Convention by saying, I'm Pete Buttigieg. You might recognize me from Fox News. You're a frequent guest on that network. What were your thoughts on this interview tonight?
Well, it was really impressive on her part. She was tough, smart, focused, disciplined, the same qualities that made her a very effective prosecutor, and I think are going to make her a very effective president. And she did it in territory that's obviously not ideologically friendly. I think she'd have many reasons to think twice about whether she was going to get fair treatment on Fox News. But even as they were interrupting her, preventing her from speaking, she got her point across, and she called out things like that moment, that exchange that we just saw, where they attempted to sidestep the shocking fact of someone wanting to be president, calling Americans the enemy from within. And I think it's especially appropriate, actually, for her to do that on Fox, because, when I think about conservatives, Republicans that I know, one of the things that's that I'm most sympathetic to about what sincere conservatives care about is a passion for liberty and a real concern about making sure that liberty is protected. Now, I disagree with a lot of Republican friends who think that, that goes so far that, enforcing the Clean Water Act isn't something we should do because it just might impinge on liberty. But these are the exact folks who need to be reminded about the implications for a freedom-loving country if the next president of the United States is somebody who has more than flirted with, talked about turning the military on American citizens who he disagrees with politically. And I think there are a lot of folks at home, maybe conservative Republicans or independents who lean right, who are thinking to themselves, if you've got a friend or a coworker or a daughter who is more politically to the left than you are, is she going to be safe in a country where the President of the United States calls her the enemy?
Well, I mean, in that interview, as she was making that argument about what Trump has said about the military, the National Guard, and using it against U.S. citizens, I mean, when you see that moment there and how she responded about the clip that was played, she's been in politics for a long time, but given that you have such experience with going on Fox, I mean, did you give her any advice about this interview beforehand?
I wasn't involved in her interview prep. What I will say is that, one principle I try to remember that I thought she demonstrated is making sure not to allow them to kind of change the subject or the framing of the question at hand, right? The whole topic there was the fact that a candidate for president and a former U.S. president described the American people, the ones he disagreed with, as the enemy. And it's really important not to allow some sidestepping of that. So, she did that. She also made sure to continue to get her point across, even when she was being repeatedly interrupted. As somebody who has a lot of batting practice myself on that network, really proud of how she represented her views, her values, and this ticket in front of a conservative audience. Something I might add, by the way, that is a show of strength. That is the exact opposite of the weakness that Donald Trump has demonstrated by pulling out of going even on CNBC, which is hardly a liberal bastion, or 60 Minutes, where it's customary for both candidates to go on. He's not prepared to go in front of a skeptical, let alone unfriendly audience. She demonstrated the opposite. And remember, this is in keeping with her continued outreach to conservatives. Look at the difference between her making clear that she would include Republicans in her cabinet, campaigning with so many Republicans, principal Republicans, who are for her, versus him referring to Democrats as the enemy.